two young sisters spent their summer mornings selling eggs at a small roadside stand near their family's farm in rural Iowa. But one ordinary day, they simply disappeared, leaving behind only an empty cash box and a community full of questions. For months, their parents lived in a waking nightmare, under suspicion, yet with no answers, only silence where their daughter's laughter used to be. Then, 3 years later, a man fishing with a magnet in a local creek made a discovery no one was prepared for. What he pulled from the water would change everything, and unravel a truth that would shake the entire town's sense of security to its core. It was just after 9 a.m. on a hot July morning. Grace Whitfield was in the garden, hands buried in the soil, pulling weeds between rows of tomatoes. In the distance, the hum of her husband Garrett's tractor echoed across the fields, a sound she'd heard nearly every day of their 23 years together on the farm. She wiped the sweat from her brow, smudging dirt across her face, when she noticed a sheriff's cruiser turning into their gravel driveway, followed by two unmarked cars. Grace's heart sank. Police don't come out this far unless something serious has happened. She stood up slowly, wiping her gloves on her jeans, watching as Sheriff Daniels, a man they'd known for years, stepped out of his car with an expression she didn't recognize. Not just official, personal, heavy. "Morning, Grace," he said quietly. "These are Detectives Morrison and Chen with the state police. We need to speak with you, somewhere private." Inside the kitchen, they sat at the old oak table. Detective Morrison, calm but direct, pulled out a tablet. "There's no easy way to say this. This morning, someone magnet fishing in Cedar Creek found an old milk can." He paused, glancing at the sheriff. "Inside were human remains, small ones. We believe they may belong to your daughter, Nora." The words hit Grace like a punch to the chest. She reached for the table to steady herself, whispering, No, that can't be. Nora's still out there. She and Kate." Detective Chen gently turned the screen toward her. "I'm so sorry, but can you identify this milk can?" Through blurred vision, Grace looked. The metal was rusted and coated in river sediment, but the label was still clear. "Farmhouse," it said, with the old drawing of a cow that Garrett's father had designed decades ago. Grace gasped. "We used to have dozens like that. We sold most, but kept some in the barn." Morrison swiped to the next photo. A glimpse of blue tarp, yellow stripes, something small inside. Grace couldn't take it. "Please, I can't." Chen nodded softly. "The examiner will confirm everything, but based on the condition and size, it's likely Nora." Outside, the sound of Garrett's tractor cut off. Moments later, he burst into the kitchen, wide-eyed. "What's going on?" he asked, looking from Grace to the detectives. "Garrett," the sheriff said, "you should sit down. Number, tell me standing." The truth came out in quiet, steady words, and each one seemed to carve deeper into Garrett's face. He sat beside Grace, gripping her hand. "Where?" he asked, his voice rough. "Where in the creek?" "Near the old railroad bridge," Morrison said. "It was stuck under some submerged logs. If that fisherman hadn't been there today, it might have stayed hidden forever." Detective Chen spoke again. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, I know this is incredibly difficult, but we need to search your property. Specifically, we need to locate and examine any remaining milk cans." Garrett looked up, eyes narrowing. "Evidence? What kind of evidence?" "The can was from your farm," Morrison said calmly. "That makes this property part of our investigation. We need to determine whether this is where the incident took place." The words hung heavy in the air. Grace couldn't bring herself to finish her thought. You think we did this?" Her voice broke. "You think we hurt our own daughter?" Detective Chen's tone was steady but regretful. "We're truly sorry, but we have a warrant. We have to follow the evidence." And just like that, more vehicles rolled in. Crime scene teams began pouring out, dressed in white coveralls, carrying cameras, tools, and evidence bags. Grace stood frozen as her family's land, The place she and Garrett had built with decades of work was suddenly being treated like the center of a crime. Garrett's hands trembled, but his voice was firm. "I'm calling Sarah." He meant Sarah Thornton, their longtime attorney. Within minutes, the familiar silver BMW came down the driveway, kicking up dust. She stepped out already in full courtroom mode. "Where's the warrant?" she asked, wasting no time. Morrison handed it over. Sarah's eyes scanned the document, her expression growing darker. "You're basing all of this on a milk can that could have been taken from this property years ago. You're treating my clients like suspects in their own tragedy." Morrison stayed calm. "We're not accusing anyone, but we are required to investigate every possibility. This is standard procedure." "And what if they choose not to speak?" "That's within their rights," Chen replied. "But we're hoping for cooperation. There's still one girl unaccounted for." "One girl," Grace said quietly. "Cora. My Cora is still out there." She could barely finish. The words came like a whisper, more plea than sentence. Sarah's hand rested protectively on Grace's shoulder. "They'll cooperate with the search," she said, "but any questioning will happen with legal counsel present. Not now, not today." Detectives exchanged a brief glance. Morrison nodded. "We understand. We'll finish up and follow up soon. But we do need statements." Outside, the search continued. Cameras flashed. Soil was collected. Every inch of the property was examined. The barn, the chicken coop, even the root cellar. Grace watched it all, stunned. 3 years of waiting, 3 years of clinging to hope. And now, this. Nora had been found, pulled from a creek like she didn't matter, and instead of comfort, they were met with suspicion. "Tom," Grace said, turning to Sheriff Daniels, "you've known us for over a decade. You know we couldn't—" "I do," he said, pain in his eyes, "but I don't make the calls anymore. This is the state's case. I'm just—" He didn't finish. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry. For everything." As he left, a familiar truck slowed at the end of the driveway. Walter Brennan, their neighbor for over 20 years. He craned his neck at the sight of the crime scene tape wrapped around their barn. Word would spread fast. An hour later, with the officers gone and the evidence bags packed, Grace sat motionless on the porch swing. Garrett stood beside her, hand gripping the railing, staring out at the only home their daughters had ever known. The quiet felt heavier than the noise. Then came the sound of tires on gravel again, Walter's old Ford pickup pulling in, raising dust in the heat. He stepped out, hat in hand, his face already twisted with worry. "I saw all the flashing lights," he said gently. "What happened?" Grace couldn't answer. The words caught in her throat. Tears that hadn't fallen all day finally did. Garrett placed a hand on her shoulder and spoke instead. "They found her, Walter. They found Nora." Walter went pale. "They found her? Where?" "In the creek," Grace whispered. "Cedar Creek. Someone pulled up an old milk can. She was inside." "Our milk can," Grace whispered. "She was inside our milk can." Walter's knees buckled, and he sank heavily into the nearest wicker chair. His hands gripped the armrests until his knuckles turned white. "Dear Lord," he murmured, voice barely audible. "Grace, Garrett, I can't even begin to imagine what this feels like." For a long moment, he said nothing more. His eyes drifted into the distance until he spoke again, quietly, his words choked by old wounds. "When I lost Daniel in that silo accident, it nearly broke me. But at least," he swallowed hard, "at least I got to bury my son. I got to say goodbye. You've spent 3 years not knowing, and now, this." Grace's gaze dropped to his trembling hands. She remembered Daniel. He'd only been 24 when the grain silo jammed, and by the time anyone realized, it was too late. She remembered the funeral, how Walter had stood alone by the grave long after everyone else had gone. His grief had hollowed him out, and after his wife left the year before, that loss had only deepened. Now he looked back at them and asked the one question on everyone's mind. All those investigators, they don't really think you—" "They do," Garrett said bitterly. "Because the milk came from our barn, they think we're responsible, like we'd ever hurt our own child." Walter's jaw clenched. "That's absurd. Anyone who's ever known you, how could they believe such a thing?" "They say they have to follow the evidence," Grace murmured, "even when that evidence is our baby thrown into a creek, like she was nothing." The sky behind them glowed with a soft orange hue, the kind of summer sunset that normally felt peaceful. But now, it just felt wrong, as if the world dared to look beautiful on a day like this. Walter stood suddenly, brushing dust from his jeans. "You shouldn't be alone right now, and I know you're in no shape to worry about the animals. I'll handle evening chores. I know where everything is." "Walter, you don't have to," Garrett began, but Walter waved him off. "This is what neighbors do. Your horses need their grain. The chickens need to be locked up. And that sweet old mule of yours, Buttercup, right? She needs her soft feed." For the first time all day, Grace allowed the smallest flicker of a smile. He remembered. Of course he did. Walter had helped them on the farm too many times to count, and they'd done the same for him. "You've got a feed delivery coming tomorrow, right?" Walter asked as he moved toward the barn. "If you need to deal with arrangements, I'll be here to receive it." The word arrangements hit Grace like a blow. They'd have to plan a service, pick out a casket small enough for what little remained of their daughter. A pain deeper than words rippled through her chest. As Walter moved across the yard, his steps familiar, even comforting, Grace sat still on the porch swing and watched. He fed the horses, checked their water, measured out the exact mix Buttercup needed for her joints. He closed the coop door gently, making sure every hen was safe for the night. His presence brought a sliver of routine to a day that had been anything but. But then, a vehicle tore into the driveway, gravel spitting out under its tires. Grace looked up. A white van, Channel 7 News. Before it had even stopped moving, the reporter was already out. Kelly Martinez, young, polished, perfectly styled despite the sweltering heat, strode forward with a microphone in hand, her cameraman right behind her, already filming. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield," she called out brightly. "Kelly Martinez, Channel 7. Could we have just a moment of your time regarding this morning's discovery?" "No," Grace said firmly, rising to her feet. "Please leave. This is our home. We're asking you to go." But Martinez didn't stop. She reached the bottom step of their porch, flashing her news-ready smile. The camera was already rolling. "I understand this is difficult," she said, "but the public deserves to know." Garrett placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. Whether to steady her or calm her, even he wasn't sure. "We can answer a few questions," he said quietly. Grace turned to him in surprise, but saw something in his eyes, a quiet resolve. Maybe it was about taking back the story before someone else twisted it. Maybe it was just the need to be heard. Martinez's smile widened. The lens zoomed in. And just like that, the story of their daughter and everything they'd tried to protect was about to be broadcast to the world. "Thank you. First question. Can you confirm that the remains discovered in Cedar Creek belong to your daughter, Nora?" Garrett kept his voice measured. "The identification hasn't been made official yet, but yes, we've been told the remains likely belong to our daughter." "And the container?" Martinez pressed. "The milk can she was found in, that came from your property?" Grace saw the trap a second too late. Garrett nodded. "We had many of those cans years ago. Most were sold." Martinez's tone sharpened instantly. "Do you want to respond to claims that you may have been involved in your own daughter's death?" The words hit like a slap. Grace felt her legs weaken again. "What claims?" Garrett demanded. "Who's saying that?" "We've spoken to sources close to the investigation," Martinez said smoothly. "They say you're being treated as suspects, that your home was searched for evidence. So tell us, where is the second girl, Mr. Whitfield? Where is Cora?" Grace gasped. "How dare you? And is it true," Martinez continued, "that you took out a substantial life insurance policy on both girls shortly before they vanished?" That the farm was under financial pressure? "Get off our land," Garrett said through clenched teeth. "Now!" Martinez hesitated for just a moment, her cameraman still filming. "The public will draw its own conclusions from your silence," she said coldly, then finally signaled to her crew. As the news van rolled away, Grace spotted Walter's truck paused down by the road. He'd seen everything. By nightfall, the headlines would start writing themselves. Their heartbreak wasn't private anymore. It was becoming public spectacle, and they were being cast as villains in their own tragedy. By 7 p.m., the last of the light had drained from the sky, and the deep purple haze of an Iowa evening settled across the fields. Grace and Garrett hadn't moved from the porch in over an hour. No words left, just wait. Then came the familiar rattle of Walter's truck again, headlights sweeping across the gravel drive. He stepped out with his usual quiet presence. "I fed the animals," he said gently, walking up the steps. "Everyone's taken care of. Horses, chickens, all set for the night." "Thank you, Walter," Garrett replied, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "We should pay—" "Don't," Walter cut him off. "But you are low on grain. I've got plenty in my barn. Come grab a few sacks, enough to get through morning." "I'll go with you," Garrett offered, starting to stand. But Grace stood first. "Number, I'll go." Garrett looked at her, surprised. "I need to do something," she said. "Anything. I can't just sit here, not another minute." He understood that feeling, that urge to escape the stillness before it swallowed you. He gave her a silent nod. Grace climbed into Walter's truck. The smell of hay and dust was oddly comforting. They drove the short distance in silence, headlights cutting through the dusk. Walter's barn stood tall in the distance, worn but strong, like everything in rural life. Inside, one bulb lit the cavernous space. Shadows stretched across the concrete floor, across tool racks, machinery, and sacks of feed. "This'll hold you a couple days," Walter said, lifting one of the 50-pound bags. "You grab the other end." Grace welcomed the task. The weight, the motion. It was better than stillness. They loaded one bag into the truck bed, then went back for more. As Walter reached for another sack, Grace glanced around the barn, eyes scanning familiar shapes, until they landed on something tucked behind an old cultivator. A blue tarp, with yellow stripes. The same tarp from the photo the detectives had shown her. Her breath caught. Wrapped in it was Nora. The world tilted. Her knees gave out. She stumbled backward, reaching for support, but missed. Her head slamming into a low wooden beam. Pain shot across her skull, blood running warm down her face. "Grace!" Walter shouted, dropping the feed sack and catching her before she fell. "I'm okay," she gasped, touching her forehead. Her hand came back wet. "The tarp," she said shakily, pointing toward it. "It's the same one from the photos. That's the tarp. She was wrapped in—" Understanding washed over Walter's face like a sudden storm. He looked shaken as he helped Grace sit on an overturned bucket. "Oh, Grace, I'm so sorry," he said softly, eyes full of remorse. "I didn't think. Let me move that out of sight." He quickly rolled up the blue tarp, tighter this time, and shoved it behind a stack of old equipment, out of view. When he returned, he handed her a clean rag and gently pressed it to her forehead. "I use those tarps for everything," he explained, voice low. "Lining the truck bed, covering tools. I never imagined seeing one would hit you like that. After what happened today," Grace gripped the rag. The sting on her forehead grounded her in the moment. "It's not your fault," she said, eyes still on the floor. "You can find that tarp in any hardware store around here. I just wasn't ready to see it again." Walter crouched beside her, his hands resting on his knees. "Maybe we should get you home. Garrett will be worried." She nodded. The weight of the day had finally caught up with her. They loaded one last sack of grain without a word, Walter doing most of the work while keeping a careful eye on her. As they headed back to the truck, he flipped off the barn light, leaving only the glow of the headlights to guide them. "I'll clear those tarps out of here tomorrow," he said gently, helping her up into the cab. "You won't have to see them again." Back at home, Grace stepped through the kitchen door, and Garrett was already on his feet. His face, drawn with worry, turned to alarm as he noticed the blood on her temple. "What happened?" he asked, already reaching for her. "I'm okay," she said quickly, though she let him guide her to a chair. "I hit my head in the barn. Just a beam. I didn't see it." Garrett grabbed their old first aid kit from beneath the sink, the same kit they'd used on scraped knees and bee stings. His hands were steady as he cleaned the wound, but his jaw tightened when she told him about the tarp. "The same kind from the photos?" he asked. Grace nodded. Garrett's shoulders tensed. "I can't get those images out of my head either. Our baby, wrapped like that." His voice broke and he fell silent. By 8 o'clock, Garrett had stretched out on the couch, saying he just needed to rest his eyes. Within minutes, he was asleep. Completely. Deeply. Grace sat nearby, watching his face soften. She pulled a quilt over him, the one the girls used to fight over during movie nights, and quietly returned to the kitchen. She didn't eat. The casserole a neighbor had dropped off sat untouched in the fridge. Instead, she wrapped her hands around a cold cup of coffee, staring at nothing. Her mind spun. Someone had taken Nora from them, and not just taken, hurt her, fit her into a milk can. The medical examiner had explained everything in sterile clinical terms, words like preservation and separation of remains. But all Grace could think about was her daughter's small body being forced into that metal shell. The silence in the house was deafening. No running water upstairs. No bickering over whose turn it was to set the table. No bedtime stories. Nora had loved the Little House books, always begged for one more chapter. Cora preferred animal stories, always made Garrett do the voices. Now the only sound was the ticking of the clock, and Garrett's soft breathing from the living room. Then, through the kitchen window, Grace noticed headlights. They were moving slowly along the dirt road behind Walter's barn, the old access road that connected to the county line. The lights paused, then went out. He was probably checking his equipment before bed. Walter had always stuck to his routines, especially after losing Daniel. Grace remembered him saying once that routine was what had kept him going. The animals didn't wait for grief to pass, neither did the fields. She looked at Garrett again. He was completely still, drained. She couldn't wake him, not for this, but something in her mind was spinning, clinging to the next task, the next moment of motion. They'd need chairs for the service. Their truck wouldn't be enough, but Walter's trailer could haul them from the church. She could ask him now, while he was still in the barn, quietly, without troubling Garrett. She slipped her phone into her pocket, eased open the back door, and stepped into the night. The night was thick with summer heat, typical for July in Iowa. Crickets filled the darkness with their steady chorus, and somewhere in the distance, a lone dog barked. Grace followed the familiar fence line toward Walter's barn, the path worn into the grass from years of shared work, neighborly help, and harvest seasons passed side by side. She held her phone in front of her, the flashlight beam cutting through the dark. As she walked, her thoughts drifted to memories of her daughters, Nora and Cora, laughing and racing ahead of her to Walter's place, eager to see his barn cats and his old horse. They'd always felt safe there, just as safe as at home. Now, that same barn stood ahead of her like a shadow, with a thin line of warm light glowing beneath the door. Grace could hear soft clinks, metal on metal, the sound of someone fixing something. Walter, working late, keeping his hands busy, the same way she needed to keep hers. 10 minutes after leaving her house, she reached for the door and gently pushed it open. The hinges creaked quietly. Inside, Walter was hunched over his workbench, a kerosene lantern casting flickering shadows along the walls. Tools lay scattered around him, and the strong scent of oil, dust, and old hay hung in the air. He looked up, startled by the noise. His wrench slipped from his hand, clattering against the concrete floor. "Grace," he breathed, clearly not expecting company. "What are you doing here? Is everything okay?" "I'm sorry," she said, suddenly unsure of herself. "I saw your lights. I didn't mean to bother you." No, Of course not, Walter said quickly, recovering his calm. He wiped his hands on his coveralls and stood up straighter. Just couldn't sleep. Figured I'd get something done. Keeps the mind steady, you know? He stepped closer, concern softening the lines on his tired face. "How's your head?" he asked, nodding at the bandage on her forehead. "I'm fine," Grace replied. "Just a small bump." She hesitated for a second before saying what she came for. "I wanted to ask you something. For the service. We'll need to bring chairs from the church. Our truck's too small. Would it be okay if we borrowed your flatbed trailer?" Walter's face changed immediately, sympathy replacing surprise. "Of course," he said. "You can use it as long as you need." He walked to the back corner of the barn, motioning for her to follow. "I'll show you where I keep the hitch, the straps, the chains, everything you'll need." She followed, grateful for his generosity, for the brief moment of kindness in a day that had offered none. Walter pulled back a tarp, revealing the trailer hitch, then began walking her through the setup. "She'll hold about 40 chairs if you stack them right," he explained, lifting the wiring harness. "This can be a little finicky, so you might need to wiggle it a bit. And these straps here, they're rated for—" But Grace's attention had wandered. Just over his shoulder, something caught her eye. A denim jacket tossed casually over a bale of hay near the workbench. Its pockets had spilled open slightly, revealing a few personal items: a wallet, a key ring, and a small folded piece of paper. Bright crayon marks stood out even in the dim light. She stepped closer, something drawing her forward. It was a child's drawing, unmistakably so. 2 stick figures, one small girl with long brown hair labeled Clara in blocky letters. Next to her, a tall figure labeled Daddy. The girl wore a blue dress with flowers, and around them were smiling suns and hearts, the kind of scene drawn by a child who felt safe. But what froze Grace was the handwriting, the art style, the shape of the eyes, the way the sun was drawn. It was exactly how Cora used to draw, the same long brown hair, the same lettering, the same placement of details. She felt the blood drain from her face. Behind her, Walter was still talking, something about safety ratings and tie-downs, completely unaware. Grace forced herself to turn back toward him, hiding her shaking hands and the thundering of her heart. "Thank you," she said, surprised her voice sounded even. "This is really helpful. I should get back before Garrett wakes up and wonders where I went." She moved toward the barn door, doing everything she could to appear calm. But as she stepped away, something in Walter shifted. His friendly expression faltered. The warmth drained from his eyes, replaced by something else, something colder, more calculated. And Grace suddenly realized she may not have been the only one keeping secrets that night. "Grace," Walter said softly. She was only 3 steps from the barn door when he moved, faster than she thought a man his age could. In a flash, he was between her and the exit, and suddenly, in his hands, a shotgun. She didn't even see where it came from. The barrel was pointed directly at her chest. "You saw Clara's drawing," Walter said, voice disturbingly calm. "I saw you looking at it." "Walter," she started. "Don't lie to me, Grace." His tone was casual, almost friendly, as if they were having a normal conversation, but his eyes were sharp, focused. "I can see it in your face, you know." Grace's mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. "Cora? Do you have Cora?" Something flickered across Walter's face. Regret, or something close to it. "I tried to spare you from more pain," he said, his voice thick. 3 years, Grace. I kept it secret. I watched you both suffer, and it tore me up. But I knew, telling you would only make things worse." He looked down for a moment. "And now, you just had to come here tonight." "Where is she?" Grace's voice broke. "Where is my daughter?" "Walk," Walter said, motioning with the shotgun toward the back of the barn. "Move." With her legs trembling beneath her, Grace obeyed. Step by step, she walked deeper into the shadows. "She calls me Daddy now," Walter said behind her. His voice had shifted, softer, almost dreamy. It took time, but children adapt. They forget. "She's happy, Grace," he added. "I need you to know that." Grace's breath caught in her throat. And Nora? Walter's tone darkened. She got sick. 2 winters ago. Pneumonia, I think. Grace stumbled, but the barrel nudged her forward again. I did everything I could, he continued flatly. Antibiotics from the animal supply, old home remedies, but nothing worked. I couldn't take her to a hospital. They'd have taken Clara away too. His voice grew quieter. She was so small. When she passed, I preserved her, did the best I could, until I could figure out what to do. It hit Grace all at once. The truth she had feared since the moment she saw the drawing. Walter had taken both her daughters. One of them had died in secret, and the other was alive. She's alive? Grace whispered. Her name is Clara, Walter snapped. My daughter, Clara. Tears burned Grace's eyes. Cora, her Cora, had been just over the fence, close enough to hear if she'd only known where to listen. Walter forced her forward toward what looked like a wooden wall. But as they neared, Grace saw the outline of something hidden, a door, perfectly blended into the paneling. Walter leaned in, unlatched it, and opened the way to a staircase descending into darkness. Go, he said. Grace stood frozen. In all her years of visiting this barn, she'd never known about this hidden stairwell. Now, Walter said, sharper this time. She stepped down slowly, one hand on the rail, the other pressed to her chest. The air grew colder with every step. The scent of manure thickened, heavy, suffocating. That's when she realized it was directly beneath the feed pile. No wonder search dogs hadn't picked up a trace. The smell would have masked everything. At the bottom, another door. Walter reached past her to open it, and what Grace saw inside stole the breath from her lungs. The room was clean, pink walls, butterflies, a bookshelf filled with chapter books, a child-sized desk, a quilted bed, even a tiny kitchenette. It wasn't a cell. It looked like a bedroom, a quiet world frozen in time. And sitting at the desk, drawing quietly, was Cora. Grace froze. Her daughter looked up, taller now, her features older, sharper. 11 years old. She'd missed 3 years of her daughter's life. But it was Cora's eyes that broke her. Wide, scared, empty. The moment their eyes met, Cora flinched, scooting backward until she pressed herself into the corner behind the desk. Cora, Grace gasped. Sweetheart, it's me. It's Mommy. Cora didn't answer. Stay back, Walter barked. He raised the shotgun again, voice trembling now with tension. You're upsetting her. Cora's voice was barely a whisper. Daddy, who is she? Grace's heart shattered. She called him Daddy. She doesn't remember, Walter said, voice trembling with righteousness. I kept her safe. Look at this room. Look how I've cared for her. She's smart. She reads at a high school level. I've taught her everything. History, science, literature. His voice cracked. She's been happy. She's mine now. Cora, Grace sobbed, stepping forward despite the gun still pointed at her chest. Sweetheart, it's me. It's Mommy. Please, look at me. But Cora, her daughter, pressed deeper into the corner. Her wide eyes, full of confusion and fear, didn't soften. My name is Clara, she whispered. I don't know you. Walter stepped between them, the shotgun steady in his hands. This is the woman from the accident, Clara, he said gently, like he was explaining something to a child. Remember? The one who hurt your sister, Nora. No! Grace cried, her voice cracking. No, Ka, that's not true. He's lying to you. Walter's tone turned colder. You're scaring her. Clara, what did I teach you about strangers? About people who try to confuse you? Grace watched her daughter nod slowly, and that simple motion shattered her. That look in her child's eyes, trust. Trust in the man holding them both hostage. 3 years. 3 years of lies. 3 years of stolen memories and twisted stories. Cora, please, Grace begged. Remember the farm? The speckled hen you named Freckles? Saturday pancakes? Your dad making them into dinosaurs and stars? Something flickered behind Cora's eyes. A tiny shift. Uncertainty. The faint glint of a memory breaking through. But then, just as fast, it vanished. My parents died, Cora said, in a crash. Daddy Walter saved me. He pulled me out. She's been happy here, Walter insisted. his voice tightening as he began pacing. She has everything, a home, books, we do art, she helps cook, she learns. He gestured around the room. Grace saw drawings on every wall. Dozens, no, hundreds. Pictures of a tall man and a little girl, a house, a farm, a life built on lies, and again, the same image. The man labeled Daddy shielding the girl from faceless shadows in the background. Grace felt the world spinning. "Please," she whispered, "she's my daughter." Walter's pacing turned frantic. The gun trembled in his grip. He was unraveling, fast. And then footsteps, above them. Boots, heavy, familiar, and a voice. "Walter, you in here? You seen Grace?" Garrett. He'd woken up. Grace's heart surged. Hope crashed through the panic. But before she could speak, Walter moved. Fast. The shotgun was suddenly at her ribs, and his breath was in her ear. "Not a sound," he hissed. "You scream, you warn him, and I'll shoot you both. You want her to see that?" Grace locked eyes with her daughter. Cora was frozen, wide-eyed, terrified. She couldn't let her see more horror, couldn't let her lose both her parents. "Stay where you are," Walter ordered. "Both of you. Don't move." He backed away, keeping the weapon pointed at Grace until he reached the stairs. Then he climbed, pulling the hidden door shut behind him. A loud click echoed through the small room. Grace was trapped. Above, Garrett's voice came again, muffled. "Your truck's here." Grace said she was coming to ask about the trailer. "She did," Walter replied, his tone smooth, too smooth. "She stopped by, asked about the trailer for the service. I showed her where everything was. Must have missed her when she left." "She's not home," Garrett said. "It's been over half an hour." Walter didn't miss a beat. "Probably walked the long way. It's been a hard day. Maybe she needed air." Grace looked at Cora. Her daughter was still staring, her entire body tense, unsure. This was the moment, their only chance. If Walter got away with the lie, if he came back down with that gun, it would be over. Grace thought of Nora, of the illness, of the years lost, of the silence, and of how close her baby had been. Just on the other side of the fence, now she had one shot. She ran. Her feet slammed the stairs. Her hands found the latch. The door burst open. "Garrett!" she screamed. "He has Cora! He has our baby!" The barn exploded into chaos. Walter spun around mid-sentence, his face contorting, not with surprise, but with fury. He lunged for the shotgun, which he'd left propped against the wall in an effort to appear calm and harmless. But Grace was already moving. She hurled herself forward, past Garrett, past Walter, everything in her driven by one primal thought: get there first, because if Walter reached that gun, none of them were getting out alive. Her fingers closed around the barrel just as Walter grabbed the stock. The shotgun swung wildly between them as they struggled, Grace using everything she had to hold him off. But Walter was stronger. Years of farm labor had made him hard to overpower. Her grip slipped. The weapon tilted dangerously. "Grace!" Garrett's voice rang out, shocked, still processing what she had screamed just seconds before. "He has Cora?" Grace gasped between clenched teeth, locked in the struggle. "Downstairs, hidden room!" Garrett didn't hesitate. No questions, no disbelief, just action. He tackled Walter from the side, and now all three of them were tangled in a desperate, chaotic fight for the weapon. 4 hands, 1 gun, 1 wrong move, and it would go off. Grace's strength was fading. Walter's advantage grew, and in that flash of clarity, she knew what had to be done. She let go. Walter stumbled backward, off balance, still grappling with Garrett. Grace didn't wait. She ran, out of the barn, into the darkness. Her legs flew beneath her as tools clattered and fists landed behind her. A cry rang out. She didn't know whose. It didn't matter. The house. She had to reach the house. Call for help. She burst through the back door, lungs burning, fingers trembling so badly she could barely punch in the numbers. 911, what's your emergency? "This is Grace Whitfield, County Road 12, she cried into the phone. "Walter Brennan has my daughter. He's had her for 3 years. My husband's fighting him. He has a gun. Please, please send help." "Ma'am, slow down. You said someone has your—" "He kidnapped her. She's alive, in a hidden room under his barn. They're fighting. He has a shotgun." "Officers are on the way. Stay on the line." But Grace had already dropped the phone. She knew where Garrett kept his backup pistol. The kitchen drawer. Her hands wrapped around the grip, loaded, ready. She didn't hesitate. By the time she sprinted out again, sirens were cutting through the quiet countryside. Red and blue lights streaked across the night sky. Police cruisers skidded into the yard, officers jumping out, weapons drawn, then the ambulance, more vehicles, state troopers, unmarked sedans, the biggest law enforcement response Cedar County had ever seen. Grace ran into the barn breathless, and there was Garrett, standing over Walter, who was writhing on the ground, blood pooling from a gunshot wound to his leg. The shotgun lay several feet away, smoke still rising from the barrel. "Garrett!" Grace rushed to him. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," he said, panting. Gun went off in the struggle, caught him in the leg. He looked at her, eyes wide. "Grace, is it true? Is Cora really here?" "She's down there," Grace called to the officers now filling the barn. "Hidden door, under the back wall. My daughter's down there." She didn't wait. While paramedics restrained and treated Walter, Grace threw open the hidden door and rushed down the stairs. Cora was still in the corner, frozen, her face streaked with tears. "Daddy Walter," she sobbed. "I want Daddy Walter." Grace's heart broke all over again, but she didn't stop. She wrapped her daughter in her arms, held her close, even as Cora squirmed in confusion. "It's okay," Grace whispered through tears. "You're safe now. I've got you. I've got you." Officers and photographers descended behind her, documenting everything. The decorated walls, the stacks of workbooks, the drawings, the calendar that marked off 3 stolen years with stars and smiley faces. A hidden life, a stolen childhood. Grace carried Cora up the stairs, her daughter's arms slowly, hesitantly wrapping around her neck. They emerged into a storm of flashing lights and urgent voices. At least 20 emergency vehicles crowded the property. It was no longer a farm. It was a crime scene. Garrett ran to them, collapsing into an embrace as he held both of them close. "Cora," he whispered, "my baby girl." But Cora stiffened. She turned her face away, her eyes searching the barn. "Daddy?" she said softly. "What's happening to Daddy?" Walter was being loaded onto a stretcher by EMTs, cuffed, silent. A female officer approached quietly, a blanket in her hands. "She needs medical attention," the officer said gently. "Both of you do. We'll get your statements later." Grace nodded wordlessly. There would be more pain ahead, more questions, more healing. But for now, she had her daughter in her arms, and that was the only truth that mattered. As Grace stepped toward the waiting ambulance, she caught a glimpse of Sheriff Daniels. He stood just beyond the flashing lights, his face a mix of anguish and stunned disbelief. For years he had searched with them, prayed with them, supported them like family. And now, it was clear in his eyes. The truth was unbearable. The girls had been just across the fence all along. The guilt hung on him like weight he'd never shake. Meanwhile, at Cedar County Hospital, cold, fluorescent lights buzzed quietly above Walter Brennan's hospital bed. He lay pale and groggy, his right leg heavily bandaged. 2 deputies stationed outside his room. The shotgun wound had shattered bone and torn muscle, and now the drugs were fading. Detective Morrison sat quietly beside him, recorder already rolling. He'd waited for this moment, that narrow window between sedation and full consciousness, where the mind speaks before it filters. Walter's eyes fluttered open, slowly focusing on the badge at Morrison's chest. "Mr. Brennan," Morrison said calmly, "you're in the hospital. You've had surgery. Do you understand where you are?" Walter gave a slow nod. A nurse stepped in with a straw of water, then left as Morrison raised a hand. "I need to advise you of your rights," the detective began, but Walter cut him off. "I'll talk," he rasped. "They deserve to know the truth, all of it." Morrison steadied himself. "Start from the beginning. Walter's gaze drifted past the ceiling, as if watching memories play on invisible screens. "I watched those girls grow up," he said, voice distant. "Grace used to set them in a playpen under the oak tree while she worked the garden. I saw their first steps, heard their giggles. They were light. After Mary left me, after Daniel's accident, those girls were the only good thing left on this earth." Morrison stayed quiet. Walter continued, softer now. "They used to wave when they saw me, called me Uncle Walter. I loved them." He blinked slowly. "And one day, I decided I couldn't live without them." Morrison's pen scratched across the page. "Tell me about the day it happened." Walter's fingers fidgeted with the blanket. "It wasn't sudden. I spent months building that room under the barn. Worked at night, ventilation, insulation, soundproofing. No one could know." His voice trembled slightly, but he kept going. "I studied their routine. I knew they ran that little egg stand in the mornings. I also knew Grace and Garrett couldn't see the road from the house." Morrison's grip tightened around his notes. The detail, the calculation, it was chilling. "I drove up that day like any other customer," Walter said. "Told them I'd forgotten my wallet, asked if they'd ride with me to get the money. Nora was excited. School was starting soon. Cora had her doll." He swallowed hard. "I told them I had new kittens to show them. They loved animals, especially Cora. They followed me into the barn, down into the room." His voice lowered to a whisper. "I told them there'd been a car accident, that their parents were hurt, and that I was taking care of them until it got better." Morrison felt his stomach turn. "What happened to Nora?" Walter's shoulders sagged. "She got sick," he said, tears forming now. "About a year and a half in. It started small, a cough, then a fever. I think it was pneumonia." Morrison leaned forward. "Why didn't you get help?" Walter's voice broke. "I couldn't. If I took her to a doctor, they would have found Cora. I couldn't lose her. I tried everything. Animal, antibiotics, herbal remedies, but nothing worked. Clara, she begged me to call someone, but I told her we couldn't risk it." Morrison had to pause the recording as Walter sobbed into his hospital blanket. When he recovered, his voice was hollow. "She got worse, couldn't breathe, and then she was gone." Silence. "I wrapped her in blankets, put her in the freezer in the old processing shed." "And the milk can?" Morrison asked, barely able to keep his voice steady. Walter looked ashamed. "I remembered them from the Whitfield's barn sale years ago. Slipped over one night, took one. I didn't know what else to do." He fell silent, and in that silence, the weight of his confession hung like thunder. Walter's voice dropped to a whisper. "I had to make her fit," he said. Detective Morrison sat still, heart thudding in his chest. "I used the tools from my processing shed, waited for spring flooding, thought the creek would carry it away. Or if someone found it, they'd assume the parents were involved. The can came from their farm after all." Morrison barely managed to keep his voice steady. "And Cora? How did you hide her during the searches?" Walter straightened slightly, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "I moved her between the room under the barn and the attic. The attic used to be Daniel's room. I repainted it pink, filled it with books, toys, everything a little girl could want. If I knew where the searchers were headed, I moved her to the other space. They never found the barn room. Too well hidden. The manure pile masked the scent." "And what did you tell her?" Morrison asked. "That her family died in a car crash. That I pulled her from the wreck. That I saved her. She was young. After a while, she believed it. Started calling me Daddy. Said her name was Clara. 2 floors up in the pediatric wing, Grace sat at her daughter's bedside. Cora, or rather, the girl who believed she was Clara, clutched a worn teddy bear. Her eyes flicked nervously between her mother and the child psychologist, Dr. Elena Marsh. "Clara," Dr. Marsh asked gently, holding up one of the drawings recovered from Walter's property, "can you tell me about this picture?" "My name is Clara," the girl replied firmly. "Daddy says you're trying to trick me. He warned me about people who want to take me away." Grace's lips trembled. Her child was right in front of her, breathing, alive. and yet a stranger, stolen not just in body, but in memory. The table was covered in drawings, happy scenes, a little girl and her daddy reading books, cooking, playing, and always in the background, dark, faceless figures labeled bad people, the ones he told her to fear. "What happened to your sister?" Dr. Marsh asked. Cora's face fell, her voice cracked. "She got sick. Daddy tried to save her, but she died. It wasn't his fault. He did everything he could." Back in the surgical ward, Walter was still speaking, his voice pouring out like an unstoppable tide. "I homeschooled her," he said. "She reads at a high school level. I taught her science, history, math. We did art every day. She loves to draw." He smiled faintly, oblivious to the horror of what he was describing. "She stopped asking questions after the first year. I showed her news stories about crashes, told her that was how her family died. After a while, she didn't question it. After 2 years, she called me Daddy without hesitation. By year 3, she was Clara, completely." Just then, the lead detective stepped into the room. "Mr. Brennan," he said, his voice calm but unflinching, "our psychiatric team has completed a preliminary evaluation. You've been diagnosed with a severe delusional disorder, triggered by the loss of your son." Walter's eyes narrowed. "I'm not crazy," he snapped. "I loved those girls. I was a good father to them." "You kidnapped them," the detective said coldly. "One of them died in your care. The other doesn't even remember who she is." Walter's jaw clenched. "Clara," he corrected. "Her name is Clara, and she was happy. Back in pediatrics, doctor." Marsh sat with Grace and Garrett, who'd just finished giving their statements. "She's been living in a different reality for 3 years, the doctor explained gently. "In her mind, Walter is her father. You are strangers trying to take her away from everything she remembers." "Will she remember us?" Grace asked, barely able to form the words. "Memory in children is complicated," Dr. Marsh said. "Some memories may return, others may be gone. What matters now is patience, therapy, and time. A lot of time." Grace looked at her daughter, still drawing, always drawing, trying to make sense of a fractured world with crayons and paper. "We'll wait," Grace whispered. "As long as it takes. She's alive. That's all that matters." But even as she spoke, her thoughts drifted to Nora, to the daughter who died sick and afraid, calling for her mother in a place no one could reach, to the child whose body had been hidden away like a secret no one wanted found. Later that night, as Walter was being transported to county jail, the gurney passed through the hospital lobby. Behind the glass, Grace and Garrett were completing paperwork. Walter spotted them. He called out, "I love them," he shouted, voice echoing in the sterile hallway. "I was a good father. Tell Clara I love her. Tell her Daddy loves her." Grace turned her face away. She couldn't bear to look at the man who stole their lives. Garrett's arm wrapped around her shoulders as the elevator doors closed. Walter's face vanished behind the metal doors, his expression frozen somewhere between delusion and desperation. Still convinced he'd saved the girls, when all he'd done was destroy them.